welcome to KCPW. I'm Mika.
And I'm Ari, and this is
Waking Up to War. Thank you for joining us. Any news updates today?
As a matter of fact, yes, we have some news about the Berlin Wall. Sending it to you, Gabby.
Thank you, Ari. We all felt a sense of relief in the West as the looming Berlin Wall's purpose to keep Western fascists out of East Berlin was revoked on November 9th. Citizens encouraged to cross the border as they please with no consequences. The Berlin Wall stood as a reminder of the Cold War and the dangerous warning of the Iron Curtain dividing the West and the East since its construction started on August 13, 1961. The communists claimed to have built it as a barrier to protect themselves from the fascists of the West, but in reality it served to prevent the poor citizens of East Berlin from escaping to developed capitalist West Berlin and then to the freedom in the Western nations. The noise you hear in the background is the citizens of East Berlin chipping away at the Berlin Wall with whatever they can use. Others cross over and are reunited with their loved ones.
Thank you, Gabby. Seems like a lot of families are going to be much happier now.
Totally. Now we have another story for you guys. Here's Brian with more on the Iran-Contra scandal.
Thanks, Ari. Earlier this year, the scandal that cast a shadow over President Ronald Reagan's terms started to come to an end. Yes, it seems Iran-Contra is finally finishing. But before we talk about how Iran-Contra ends, we have to discuss how it started. So, how did war movements on opposite sides of the world come to be involved in the same affair? Let's find out. It started with the Reagan Doctrine, our former president's policy to destroy communism. Under this doctrine, the CIA was supposed to send aid to anti-communist revolutions around the world, including the Nicaraguan Contrarrevolucionarios, or Contras, in their effort against the Cuban-backed Sandinista government. However, after Congress passed the Boland Amendment in 1983, banning U.S. aid to the Contras for the purpose of overthrowing the Nicaraguan government, this proved difficult. Still, President Reagan wanted to do everything possible to help the Contras' cause. Then, in 1985, Iran secretly requested to purchase weapons from the U.S. for its fight against Iraq, even though the U.S. had an embargo on weapons sales to them. But we sold the weapons anyway. Why? There are multiple reasons. First, National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane believed the sale would help improve relations between the U.S. and Iran, as well as with Lebanon. President Reagan also hoped the sale would obtain the release of 7 U.S. hostages in Lebanon from Iranian terrorists, which broke his campaign promise never to deal with terrorists and hurt his image of honesty. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger and Secretary of State George Shultz were also in on it, though they opposed the idea. The scandal was revealed in a Lebanese newspaper in November 1986, but by then over 1,500 missiles had already been sold. And though 3 of the hostages had been released, 3 more had unfortunately already taken their place. A week later, President Reagan released a public statement claiming that it was not an arms for hostages deal, but our polls show that only 14% of Americans believed him. So it makes sense that this would be an Iran scandal, but where do the Contras come in? Well, in probing the deal, Attorney General Edwin Meese discovered that of the $30 million Iran sent to the US for the weapons, only $12 million had gone to the Treasury. So what happened to the rest? In the Iran-Contra hearings, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North revealed that he had sent the rest of the funds to the Contras for their war effort, with the approval of his superior, National Security Advisor John Poindexter. Now we come to how the scandal started to end this year. Iran-Contra hearings began in July 1987 and will continue until 1993. Many of the major officials who played a role in the affair are being sent to trial. Poindexter resigned, and of course, North was fired, but the major charges against him were dropped this January on a technicality. Independent counsel Lawrence Walsh will continue to investigate the scandal in the coming years, but our sources have predicted that current President George Bush will pardon 6 of the major players in 1992, effectively ending the investigation. There's no evidence that Reagan or Bush had any knowledge of the diversion of funds, and in the Iran-Contra hearings, President Reagan couldn't seem to remember anything about the affair. That's all for that story. Back to you, Ari.
What an interesting story. What's that? Looks like it's time for sports.
Yes, it is. Last year, the Summer Olympics were held in Seoul, South Korea from September 17th to October 2nd. 159 nations were represented by a total of 8,391 athletes. 237 events were held, and 27,221 volunteers helped to prepare for the Olympic Games. These games were broadcasted worldwide. North Korea, a communist country, and its ally Cuba boycotted the Games. They did not want to play in their enemy country as a result of this ongoing war. The United States took third place overall this year, with a total of 36 gold medals, 31 silver, and 27 bronze. That's all for today. See you next time on Sports.
Now we have an interview with our very own former President, Ronald Reagan. Good morning, President Ronald Reagan.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for taking the time to be here. Now, I know you created the Reagan Doctrine during your presidency. Can you briefly describe what it is and its goal for us?
Certainly. The doctrine was created to eliminate communism. It allows the United States to aid anti-communist guerrillas and resistance movements to roll back Soviet-backed pro-communist governments.
Do you think it will help us win the war?
I do. I believe that with the resources and power that this doctrine gives, we will defeat the communists and go back to happy life very soon.
What would you say is one of your greatest achievements as president?
I believe that one of my greatest achievements was starting the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, a program meant to protect the US from ballistic missiles. The idea was to create a sort of umbrella, based in space, that would destroy missiles before they landed and eventually make them outdated. It even received the nickname Star Wars.
Gnarly. One more thing. Earlier on the show, we had a segment on the Iran-Contra scandal. Do you have anything to comment on that?
I don't recall.
Thank you so much for your time, President Reagan.
It has been a pleasure. And thank you, America, for helping me make America great again these past 8 years.
Right back with the book review right after this commercial break.
This is Akami. He's drinking Pepsi. Be American. Drink Coke.
Coke is it!
Good morning and welcome to Waking Up to War book segment review. I'm Morgan. Today we will be discussing the book Homeward Bound by Elaine Tyler May. This novel describes the life struggles of an American family during the 1950s and the Awful War. She illustrates the connection between foreign and political policies and family dynamics during the post-war era and now. She argues that marriage during this time can be seen as a political statement. Her main point, on the other hand, was containment, and how there was also a domestic version of containment, where the sphere of influence was at the home. I highly recommend this book for anyone who loves a good, heartfelt story. But that's all we have for today. Thank you, and now off to Gabby with Fallen Heroes.
Sadly, a hero died today. 66-year-old Thomas Charles gave his service during the Korean War.
He spent the whole time fighting until he was held captive for 6 months. Then he escaped and kept attacking the North Koreans until the ceasefire. He was truly one of America's greatest treasures and heroes. He had 3 children and even 1 grandchild. He will be remembered in their hearts and in ours as the hero for all time.
What a truly heartwarming story. Next up, we have our music segment.
Now, here we have a very special guest, David Bowie, discussing one of his older songs about 2 lovers separated by the Berlin Wall, which I thought was perfect for today. Now, David, tell us more.
Yes, of course. I was inspired by these 2 lovers who met every day under one specific gun turret light outside my studio window, and for some reason, I fell in love too. I was in love with how they embraced each other's love by the Berlin Wall, and the song tells the story of the 2, one from the east and one from the west.
What about this relationship did you love, other than them being separated by the wall?
See, I love this song because it was like I was being pulled into some wistful fantasy about the desires of happiness despite the world around them. All they wanted was to be on top of the world together, which I thought was such a beautiful thing.
Now, if you could go further into the meaning.
See, this song is about the 2 lovers and how they are being forced apart. All they wanted to do was to be together, and even if it was just for 1 second, 1 moment, 1 day in time, they could defy all odds and show that love can overcome any obstacle. But it will never last, leaving them heroes just for 1 day. When I was writing this song, I tried to capture the hopefulness and the desperation the city divided when that had only wanted to be put back together. When I sang Heroes at the concert in Berlin in 1987, it was one of my most emotional performances and one that brought me to tears.
That looks like that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, David.
No, thank you.
That's all for today's segment.
And thank you for tuning in to
Waking Up to War.